Welcome to the seminar on financing early childhood care and education. I am Mercedes Mayor Lasalle, World President of OMEP. Today, I am based inside Argentina, not at home, in this beautiful city of Concepción del Uruguay, where in 2 hours, I will be participating in another workshop together with UNICEF and the government of the province of Entre Rios. As you all know, this year, the Global Action Week of Education has the slogan, Investing in a Just World, Decolonizing Education Financing Now. And it was launched to ensure that all the global campaign for education coalitions and members could unite around the issue with a mandate to drive increased funding for better, more equitable, sustainable, and quality education. OMEP, as a member of the Global Campaign for Education, has been actively participating in the 2030 Global Action Week by underscoring the importance of public investment in early childhood education and care by all states. The concept of decolonization is essential to understand the problem of education financing that many countries in the world face. It involves changing the power dynamic between national governments and international donors, lenders, and financing institutions. Decolonization is a new concept in the educational field, at least for us. Therefore, it needs to be explored and appropriated in order to develop political advocacy based on a in-depth diagnosis and focus on removing the obstacles that prevent inclusive, equitable, and quality ECCE for all boys and girls up to 8 years old. The new political agenda opens up great opportunities to make progress in realizing the rights of young children. In this sense, the Transforming Education Summit, convened in September 2022, in response to the global crisis in education, provided a unique opportunity to elevate education to the top of the global agendas, to mobilize action, solidarity, and solutions to recover losses during the pandemic, the violence of war, the economic crisis, and thus sow the seeds to transform education in a rapidly changing world. For this reason, in this year, Global Action Week of Education calls on governments and the international community to take concrete actions for financing education as it is established in the Transforming Education Summit Financing Call to Action. Also, following the World Conference on ECCE 2022 and the Tashkent Declaration, the member states have committed to public financing of education to increase financing for ECCE to a level sufficient to achieve SDG target 4.2. In particular, working towards the allocation of at least the 10% of education expenditures to pre-primary education, and prioritize and reorient public expenditures to ECCE to focus on the poorest and most disadvantaged. To strengthen our advocacy work, we developed this webinar, sharing perspectives and experiences that reflect knowledge, diversity, and problems of public policies built around the world in relation with ECCE and financing, with the participation of relevant specialists and researchers from all the regions of the world. I would especially want to thank our guest, Maria Ron Balsera, who will be the keynote speaker in this webinar, and to the regional vice presidents of OMEP who were enthusiastic about participating, about the proposal to contribute with their views, knowledge, and experience in the territory. The 5 vice presidents worked tirelessly to realize OMEP's aims and the strategic plan in order to contribute to guaranteeing the right of care and education in early childhood, as OMEP has been doing for 75 years. So now I am pleased to introduce our dear colleague and activist, Dr. Maria Ron Balsera. Maria has worked for the last 15 years on the right to education, privatization, and tax justice. She is currently the Director of Programs at the Center for Economic and Social Rights. Until recently, she has been the Tax Ed Alliance Coordinator and Policy Advisor on Fiscal Justice and at Action Aid International. She had led research on tax and education in various countries for the project and on education financing and privatization for other multi-countries projects in Action Aid. Maria is also an associated lecturer of the University of London, and she has previously worked for the Right to Education Project, Human Rights Watch, and the Universities of Roehampton and Bielefeld. She has also worked as a consultant for GAWE and for the Global Campaign for Education. So, dear Maria, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mercedes, for the kind invitation, and thank you very much to everyone who has been working on this really important and often neglected area of early childhood and care and education. So as Mercedes has said, I'm Maria Ron Balsera, and I am the current Director of Programs for CESR. And I'm going to be talking today about how to finance early childhood care and education. This is something that is new for you, so I'm going to go fairly quickly because Mercedes has already covered some of this. But for those who are not working on the area of ECCE, I just wanted to say that this is the most effective equalizer for lifelong learning opportunities. That there are multiple research that shows that it is the best investment on education because it has the highest rate of return. But this is not only an investment, this is a matter of rights, and it's part of the right to education. Plus, it's not only good for the children, it also promotes gender equality. When we have good ECCE, then we are actually liberating and freeing that time for mothers that otherwise would be doing this unpaid care and not being able to do other things. So this is also equally important. But even when it is the best investment, when it's one of the best ways of equalizing, particularly for children from low-income households, we see that the participation in ECCE is only 61% globally. This really goes down in low-income countries, which is 20%. We see that 1 out of 4 young children under 5 have never had any form of pre-primary education. This is 33 million children right now. Only 22% of the countries have made pre-primary education compulsory, and 45% provide at least 1 year of free pre-primary education. Obviously, this is not enough. Part of the problem lies in the lack of qualified pre-primary teachers and caregivers. And the estimation is that 9.3 million full-time educators are needed to make pre-primary education universal by 2030. So again, it's very important to look at the role of teachers and education support personnel. As Mercedes was saying, the Tashkent Declaration that was adopted in November 2022, in it, the country is committed to invest at least 10% of the total education spending on pre-primary education. Right now, it's much lower than that. The declaration also committed to ensuring that the salaries and working conditions of preschool personnel are at least at par, so at the same level, with those of primary education teachers. And they reaffirmed their commitment to guarantee at least 1 year of free pre-primary education, in line with the SDG 4. However, what we are seeing currently is that only, and this is globally, only 6% of the education financing goes to ECCE, and this is much lower in low and middle income countries, which is only 2% in low income countries. What can we do to expand the education financing? Because this is not only a problem for ECCE, but it's a problem overall. So we really need to increase the 4 S's of the budget. So we need to increase the share of the budget, so how much of the national budget and how much of the GDP goes to education, the size of the budget, which is the overall size of the budget, the total amount that goes that the government has to spend, and this depends, as we will be talking about how much they collect in taxes. We also need to increase the sensitivity of the budget, so to make sure that it has an equity criteria, and we need to increase the scrutiny of the budget to make sure that it actually is allocated and it arrives where it's needed and where it's planned. So I'm going to go through some of these S's with you. The share of the budget, which is probably what is most familiar for all of us who have been working in education financing, has to do with the total, with the percentage of the country's total budget that is spent on education. For that, we have two indicators. We have how much of the national budget goes to education. That should be a minimum of 20%, although we see that the global average is around 17%, and it has been decreasing since COVID. And we also have the GDP. So the recommendation is that 6% of the GDP should be allocated to education. Now, the actual recommendation is between 4 and 6% as a minimum, right? But 4% actually relates to high-income countries mainly, and 6% is for low-income countries and middle-income countries. But where are we in that sense? Sorry, why is the slide not going? Okay. So I hope that you can see this, and maybe I can zoom in. So, sorry, no, if I zoom in, it's going to disappear, isn't it? Okay. So when we have said that the minimum education spending should be at least, well, 15%, and that's more for high and upper middle income countries, or 20% really for low and middle income countries out of the national budget, and at least 6%, or a minimum of the 4% of the GDP. Let's see how many countries are actually there. Very, very few. So we see Sierra Leone, we see the Solomon Islands, Namibia, Tunisia, but we see some that are actually in the opposite end, where they spend less than 15% and less than the 4% of the GDP, right? So we see Nigeria, South Sudan, Lebanon, Angola, Uganda, Pakistan, Singapore. And this is obviously very problematic, right? Because when countries are not reaching that minimum share, someone is paying for that, right? So either children don't go to school and they are denied their right to education, or families have to pay for this. Now, there is also this myth that ODA is actually paying for education. I really want to make this clear, because ODA only represents 3%, okay, of the total education expenditure. However, they represent a much bigger amount in terms of the decision-making processes, right? They have a much bigger say. And this is part of what we are trying to raise awareness and trying to fight against this year in GAWE, in terms of the Decolonising Education Financing. That 3% really represent the 97% of the voice and the decision-making processes, right, in low and middle income countries, when it's really this 97% that really needs to be raised through domestic resources. But I think that this graph is very telling, in the sense that in low-income countries, we see that although donors represent a higher amount of the education financing, what really is taking the burden are households. households are paying a much bigger percentage. We see between 30% and 39% of low-income countries. So those who have the least amount of money are paying the most towards education. This is the most regressive way of financing education. Even when some of the people in the World Bank, in the IMF, and those who are fighting, who are advocates for privatization, would say that household spending is something that we should be harnessing. No, this is not about affordability. It should be free, public, and of good quality. So how can we make that a reality? Well, for that, we need to be going beyond the share of the budget going to education, because for far too long we've been focusing only on that, and we have actually been competing with other public services such as health, such as water and sanitation, when we should really be joining forces, right? Because we need to increase the size of the budget overall. We need to increase how much of to increase the GDP in a progressive manner, and also to increase the national budget. So how are we going to do that? Well, we see here that low-income countries have a very low tax to GDP ratio. That's 11.5%. So if we follow Piketty, the famous French economist, we will see that these countries cannot really afford to have any more than regalian state. They cannot really afford to have a proper social contract, proper public services, right? And it should be at least like 20%. So we see that this is only the case for the OECD, so the club of rich nations, that actually they have a lot to say in terms of how taxes are collected globally, not only for them. If we actually look at the regions, we see here that South Asia is the one that collects the least in terms of the tax to GDP, and EU, the European Union, has the highest, 37%. I'm going to be moving through the slides quite quickly because I would like to cover quite a lot. So sorry for the interpreters. So how can we actually raise this tax to GDP? Well, if you listen to the World Bank and to the IMF, the usual recommendation is to increase VAT, value-added taxes, which are the consumption taxes, the sales taxes. And these are indirect taxes, and we all pay the same. These are very regressive, of course, because what we want to see is that those that have most money, most wealth, pay more as a percentage of their income, right? Or of their wealth. But this isn't the case, because it's a lot easier just to raise the VAT. But then the poorest pay much more as a percentage of their income and wealth, as you can see in these cartoons as well. I hope that they are quite telling. So what we really want to increase is the corporate income tax. And you might have seen that there have been some moves towards settling at a minimum, a global minimum income tax. Corporate income tax, right? And we were fighting for many years for this to be 25%, but the OECD has set it at 15%. Even when it's a minimum, this has the real danger of just becoming the top, the maximum. And this is much lower than what most of the countries have as corporate income tax, particularly in Africa. And this is something that we had to fight against. And that's why countries shouldn't be really joining the inclusive framework, as they call it, which is not inclusive at all. But anyway, and that's why we should really be supporting multilateral efforts, particularly the UN Tax Convention and UN Tax Body, which is something that they are discussing right now. And it's a really exciting time to be talking about taxes. So progressive taxes are corporate income tax when it has the thresholds, wealth taxes such as inheritance, property tax, also personal income taxes that rise with the income and exempt those in lowest wages. Also windfall taxes, we see that big companies are making huge profits, and this is the new normal, unfortunately, right? And we should really be looking less at the regressive taxes. So as a rule of thumb, normally direct taxes, those that target individuals or corporations, organizations, tend to be more progressive, and indirect taxes, such as those like sales taxes, VAT, tend to be more regressive. Now, what we see is that, why is this so important? Because tax abuse, global tax abuse, is estimated to be $483 billion per year. This is more than enough to adequately fund ECCE, to adequately fund education and SDG 4, and actually to fund the other SDGs, okay? So this is why it's important, and we should all be looking at this. We don't need you to be all like tax experts in terms of the technical thing. But when we are talking about tax justice, we can all get the justice part of it, okay? And this is what I'm trying to explain to you. So what's the other side of the coin? Because we are not raising enough in taxes, because we don't have enough funding to pay for public services, to pay for education, debt is increasing, right? And countries are borrowing more and more. And again, was the advice particularly from the IMF, from the World Bank, and even from the Minister of Finance, normally to always prioritize debt repayment services instead of the people, right? So particularly with the inflation we see that the interest rates are really going up, debt is going up, and it's all about paying the debt and just keeping the inflation under control. Well, this is really wrong, because what we are seeing is that countries are spending much more in debt repayment services than they are investing on education. And this is leading to massive exclusion of children who are not able to go and enjoy the right to education, right? And this is the same for the other services. And at the same time, they're pushing for privatization. So instead of becoming a right, it's becoming either a privilege or it's becoming a charity. And this is something that we really need to fight against. That's why we need to be pushing for tax justice. And again, I said this is quite good for remembering why tax justice is important. We talk about the 4 R's in this sense. So we talk about how it increases to raise revenue so we can spend it for public services. It also increases redistribution, and this can diminish inequalities in terms of vertical and horizontal inequalities. So those who have more money pay more, and we can all enjoy it, right? So that's part of the redistribution. It also encourages repricing to also limit public bad such as tobacco, carbon emissions, but also to actually try to bring down these windfall profits, right? Like this greedflation, right? Like this inflation that is actually moved by profit and by investors wanting to make more and more money. And perhaps the most important is that it increases representation, strengthening that social contract, right? Building healthier democracies processes and recognizing that there is a higher reliance on government spending on tax revenues linked to the higher quality of governance and political representation. Because when we have the donors paying for public services, when we have the donors paying for education, you are breaking that contract of I pay my taxes and I receive good public services in exchange. But it's not only about the share and the size. We also need to increase the sensitivity because the sensitivity of the budget looks at how the spending should be done with an equity criteria, making sure that girls, children from marginalized groups, including disabled children, are more, receive the adequate resources to actually level the playing field and to diminish pre-existing inequalities. When we have equality in spending, and we are just like perpetuating the status quo, we really need to have this equity to make sure that everyone gets the support that they need. And the last S is the scrutiny of the budget. And I really would like to encourage you all to be paying more attention at all the levels, to be participating in the budget processes, right? And at all levels, from the teachers, the education support personnel, the parents in the school, to the local authorities at all levels, right? And to understand this, we have actually produced this Transforming Education Financing Toolkit for activists, and I will be leaving the link on the chat. So I'm going to leave it there. I hope I haven't taken too much time. Thank you very much, Mercedes.
Thank you so much. It is a very interesting presentation, the clarity of concept, the tool in order to see the 4S and the 4 Rs, really amazing. And we will repeat and repeat this video of this webinar in order to understand better all the concepts. And of course, we will download and share the toolkit. Thank you so much for your presentation, Maria. And then now we will listen to the comments of our valued vice presidents, who make the all together the World Executive Committee with me and the World Treasurer. First of all, we will listen to the Vice President of the Asia Pacific region, Sandy Wong. Sandy Wong is a professor in early childhood and co-director of the Center of Research in Early Childhood Education at Macquarie University and research fellow with Good Start Early Learning Australia. Sandy conducts collaborative research with academics, early childhood organizations and practitioners, as well as with governments on early childhood practices, workforce, and educator well-being related issues. Dear Sandy, you will have the floor for about 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mercedes. I just put my timer on so I know how long I'm going for. So thank you, Mercedes, for the opportunity to speak this evening. As you said, I am the Vice President for the Asia Pacific region. We actually had our regional meeting on Monday, and whilst I didn't share my notes, I did advise the other presidents of what I was going to speak of, and I have their endorsement. Maria, just to follow on, I was really shocked by that figure of $500 billion of tax dodging. And if we all became tax consultants, perhaps we could solve this problem of underfunding of early childhood education. What I want to talk about today is really, it touches on another issue you raised, which is in terms of equity in access. And one of the challenges that we have in the Asia Pacific region is the diversity of our region. And this diversity includes the diversity of wealth. So we have highly wealthy nations such as Japan and Australia and New Zealand, Singapore, South Korea, but we have very poor countries such as Pacific Islands and Timor-Leste. We're very diverse in our culture, in our languages, and in our religions. So we have countries that are Buddhist, countries that are mainly Christian, countries that are Islamic, and so on. And this means that the philosophies and the emphasis around early childhood education varies both across and within countries. And it's particularly linked to the ideas of women's roles in society. We're very diverse in our geography as well. So some services, some places in Australia, children are hundreds of kilometres away from any early learning service. And then in other areas, we have children in high-rise buildings who don't have any access to outside areas during their play. We're diverse in terms of the degree of impact in climate change. So we have some countries in the region who are under existential threat. And so their capacity to even think about access to early childhood may be limited. Our countries vary in the size of our nations and their political structures. We have countries with huge populations that are tightly packed into cities like Japan and Korea. And we have small nations such as Singapore. We have democracies, we have kingdoms, we have communist countries and those under military control. And all of these factors impact on the positioning of early childhood within the political structures. And of course, many of the countries in our region are still living with the historical consequences of colonization. So capacity to provide early childhood in our region really varies across our countries. It varies in terms of who provides early childhood. So in Australia, for example, we have a very mixed economy with most services being privately owned. But in Japan, most countries are provided by this, early childhood services are provided by the state. We have a diversity in terms of quality. So some countries have quality frameworks and early years curriculum, and others do not. It varies in terms of access to free early childhood education. So in some countries, there is available education in the years before school is available, and in other countries, it's not. And then the utilization varies. In Singapore, for example, we were told the other night that there's more than a 98% attendance in early childhood, where in countries such as Timor-Leste, it's down in the 20%. And when children don't have access, it puts pressure on the school system. So for example, in Timor-Leste, many of the children are held back in kindergarten or the first year of school because they're not ready to transition into their second year of school. And this adds extra burden. Not only are the classes, the first year of school become bigger, but the children and their families are experiencing the cost of that. And then the system itself has to have the children at school for years longer. And of course, the availability of qualified educators. That's been a challenge for most countries. And in some countries in our region, there are no formalized qualifications for educators. So together, all of these factors make it really difficult to provide a sort of an overview of the Asia-Pacific region and one solution fits all. We really don't have enough data from our region, and we need that data in order to provide evidence-informed approaches to financing early childhood education in our region. So whilst all countries in the Asia-Pacific region need to improve access ability, we really need to get a better understanding of our diversity and its implications in order to progress the provision of high quality early learning in some of the poorer countries, in particular in the region, so that all children can benefit. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Sandy. Thank you for your words and for your contribution and perspective. And I should say that we have here colleagues participating from Argentina, Australia, Canada, Ghana, Russia, New Zealand, Ecuador, Mexico, Sweden, France, Cuba, Japan, Nigeria, Kenya, Turkey, Croatia, Peru, Spain, and Paraguay. I think I do not miss anyone, but if not, please write in the chat. Thank you so much. Now we will continue with the presentation of the Vice President of the Latin American region. Desiree Lopez de Maturana Luna is an early childhood educator, master in educational administration, and doctor in education. She is currently the professor at the University of La Serena, and she has vast academic experience in different Chilean universities. She has served as Executive Vice President of the Chilean National Board of Kindergarten, implementing public policies and expanding coverage and access, sorry. So she has been participating in consulting and coordination with governmental and non-governmental organizations in the region. Dear Desiree, you have the floor. Por favor, Desiree.
Muchas gracias, Mercedes, y un saludo a todos quienes están hoy aquí, y gracias también a quienes me han antecedido en la palabra, porque han mostrado una realidad absolutamente compartida. Yo hoy me quiero enfocar en lo que ha sido la ruta y cómo hemos remarcado la ruta en Latinoamérica para el trabajo que tenemos que realizar. Y en este sentido decir que el marco del plan estratégico de OMEP parte relevando los ejes centrales de su visión, y aunque parezca repetido, creo que es importante decir que ha establecido una ruta ineludible para que las acciones que desarrollemos pongan la urgencia necesaria en propiciar un mundo en el que todos los niños, las niñas pequeñas sean respetados como ciudadanos desde el nacimiento, y que gocen, tal como dice el documento, efectivamente de todos los derechos humanos consagrados en la Convención de los Derechos del Niño, trabajando y contribuyendo para que los estados y el conjunto de las sociedades cumplan con su compromiso de proporcionar una educación equitativa, inclusiva y de calidad a todos los niños, niñas en la primera infancia, desde el nacimiento a los 8 años. En nuestra región hemos tomado como faros iluminadores permanentes el documento de la década de la primera infancia, la Declaración de los Derechos del Niño y algunas observaciones, la Declaración de Tashkent, los compromisos con la Agenda 2030 y los acuerdos de la Campaña Mundial por la Educación, para avanzar en el primer desafío sobre la financiación de la educación desde el principio. La causa por los derechos humanos de la infancia deben ser puestas en el centro de las agendas políticas de todos los países para asumir, enfrentar y superar los riesgos, sufrimientos e injusticias que viven los más pequeños en la etapa fundacional de sus vidas, tal como dice el documento de la década. En este contexto nos hemos sumado como región a la campaña mundial planteando que contar con los recursos para garantizar el derecho pleno a la educación desde la primera infancia es vital. Es así como durante la última semana de mayo y los primeros días de junio nos abocamos a participar activamente en la Semana de Acción Mundial por la Educación, cuyo tema central ha sido el financiamiento de la educación, relevando aquellos sentidos profundos, que la desigualdad que existe en este aspecto radica, entre otras cosas, en la colonización del presupuesto, que se presenta como un tema solo de especialistas y de expertos, dejando cualquier otra instancia ciudadana fuera de la discusión. Tal como se ha señalado en la campaña latinoamericana por el derecho a la educación, la CLADE, los presupuestos son documentos políticos que muestran las prioridades de los estados. Lo que no está, sencillamente, no se encuentra priorizado en el gasto público. Y lo que no está priorizado en el gasto público carece de importancia. La idea, entonces, para nosotros es trabajar porque el financiamiento propenda a generar un sistema inclusivo y transformador transparente, que reconozca que reconocer y participar de la distribución de los presupuestos es un aspecto muy importante para erradicar las lógicas coloniales de distribución de los recursos. Como un dato más de todos los que las investigaciones y seguimientos realizados en la región han presentado, podemos mencionar que la desigualdad que existe entre los países que más invierten en Latinoamérica con aquel que invierte en los países de menos ingresos de la OCDE es enorme. Es 3 veces más. O 3 veces menos, depende de dónde lo miremos. Y la desigualdad entre países de la misma región también. Por ejemplo, cuando Costa Rica invierte $5.676 por persona en edad escolar, en Guatemala solo $662, un 10%. Situación que se agrava cuando ponemos el ojo y el foco en el grupo etario de 0 a 3 años. Durante la SAME nos movilizamos de manera potente y articulada para alzar y relevar nuestras voces y exigir este derecho a los tomadores de decisiones, autoridades, actores estatales, no estatales, de carácter local, nacional e internacional, medios de comunicación, redes sociales y comunidad en general. Entre las acciones desarrolladas, podemos mencionar que se generó una semana preparatoria a la SAME, donde se compartieron materiales de comunicación educativa, incorporando contenidos propios de la OMEP, con énfasis en la primera infancia y también con el mensaje universal, que decía financiamiento justo para educar desde el principio. Estos mensajes estarán circulando en las redes por todo el mes de junio. Lo importante de la estrategia es que todos los comités nacionales y la red de organizaciones que participan con OMEP lanzan cada día y al mismo tiempo los mensajes, los pregoneros, videos, etcétera, en las distintas redes sociales, generando un gran llamado de atención. También se compartió el documento de la década de la primera infancia de manera personalizada a los decidores políticos, estratégicos y con incidencia en la primera infancia. Se creó un video colectivo de autoridades de la OMEP y de CLADE respecto de la SAME, y las temáticas de financiación de la educación y la información contenida en el documento de la DECA. Se finalizó con un evento virtual internacional, cuyo nombre es Invirtiendo en un mundo más justo por la descolonización del financiamiento de la educación desde el principio ya. Todo ello con el propósito de poner en la agenda pública el objetivo de sensibilizar, generar conciencia e impulsar el desarrollo de políticas globales y de fuerte impacto social con una perspectiva de justicia fiscal que priorice los cuidados y educación de la primera infancia. Todas aquellas actividades están en las redes y también las podemos compartir. Muchas gracias.
Gracias a ti, muchas gracias, Desiree. Thank you so much, dear Desiree, and we are really very grateful for your vast vision and all the action that was developed in connection with GAWE, of course, in our region in Latin America. Thank you so much. Next, we will invite our dear colleague, Marie Jolicoeur. Bonjour, Marie. She is now helping and supporting the work of our Vice President of North America and the Caribbean, Christian Bourdage-Simpson, who is on medical leave. Dear Marie, you have the floor. Well, no, I should introduce yourself. Sorry. So Marie Jolicoeur has been a college professor in early childhood education for 25 years. Before that, she was an educator and director in a childcare center for 10 years. She holds a master's degree in technological education, and she is now studying to be counselor in education for sustainable development. Her work with OMEP Canada started in 2015, just before the Korean World Assembly, and since then, she has attended every year, either as a speaker or as a representative for Canada in each conference that we had. Thank you, Maria. Now, yes, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mercedes. Hello, everyone. I'm here today to speak on the behalf of OMEP North America and CAWE about the financial situation we have now regarding ECCE and maybe education on a larger scale. So let's start with CAWE. As you can imagine, IT is for the moment in a political, economic, and social situation where the schools, NGOs, and ECCE organization have no money and lack the basic resources to support the primary needs of many children. The president of OMEP Haiti, Madame Udicourt, says that some regions are doing better right now, better than others, but overall, only the very urgent matters are attended to regarding needs of children, and no money is invested nor available otherwise. In a brief interview last March, the Minister of Education, Nemsi Manigat, said that the scholar context is actually very difficult right now, not only in days of classes, but in security matters for the children. 5% of the schools are now closed. Let's move on regarding Canada. In North America, the situation is very different. I like the diversity moment we had earlier that represent Canada very correctly. So everything is different from coast to coast. The challenges, though, are still there: money, common social actions, and political willingness. In Canada, the ECCE programs are funded on a provincial level, but not all of the NGOs get money. Only a few of them can rely on private funding or small governmental grants. Their income is basically coming from membership or basic donation. Canada meets the needs for its children almost throughout the country. In 2018-2019, 2/3 of the children aged 0 to 5 were in daycare centers or in preschool. That being said, since the provinces are autonomous in this matter, the attendance varies from 78% in Quebec, which is a leader, to 37% in Nunavut for the communities up north. Talking about the communities, some communities further from the big cities are in more need of support as for the preservation of their children's rights, and some larger cities are very overwhelmed by the number of family to help. The Quebec province has proven to be a leader in ECCE by creating a ministry exclusively dedicated to families in ECCE. And it's been around 1980 since they created that. Since its implementation, the network has allowed more than 75,000 women every year to access full-time jobs. In that province, in March 2020, 253,000 places were available for children in daycare centers. In 2023, 55,000 are still needed. The process of opening those services is ongoing. Subsidized places in Quebec are going for $8.85 a day for the parents, but the private places can go up to $60 a day. And then parents have access to tax credit at the end of the year. But right now, the public service represents only a third of the place available. So a very large effort has been made since 2020 to encourage the private daycares to switch to public services. In Quebec, in 2018-2019, the government spent $2.37 billion for its daycare program. So on a more federal level, there is no Canadian federal organization for ECCE, but like said before, the provinces are autonomous on that regard. They can decide the degrees of accessibility, provincial laws, affordability, educator training, thus creating a multitude of ECCE services, which are very different throughout the country. To that effect, the federal government had seen the result in Quebec over the years and took actions by now collaborating with every other provinces, sometimes transferring money, sometimes sustaining the network already in place. In 2017, the federal government adopted the bilateral agreement with provinces and territory, investing over $1.2 billion over 3 years. And they just now told us a few months ago that they were going to give every year $625 million by province. At the federal level, parents have access to other allowances for tax, deduction for daycare, maternity and paternity leaves, and welfare allocation. But we do have other problems or other concerns. In Canada, finding workers with a degree in ECCE is very, very difficult. The salary being low, between $22,000 and $50,000 a year, depending on the kind of daycare, the province, or the hours available. If I compare to United States, I go to United States now. Like in Canada, United States have many different models of childcare services. Basically takes one of these forms: home-based services, daycare center, kindergarten or preschooling, most of which are private, profit or non-profit organization. And the nationwide programs are Head Start, CCDF, and TANF. The states are also autonomous regarding ECCE.
Marie, you have 1 minute.
Oh, okay. So if I have 1 minute, I will go to 75% of the USA children attend one or the other service offered. 60% do so full time. Parents have to devote 13% of their family income for ECCE. And they pay between $4,000 and $12,000 a year for ECCE. That's too much, and we need to work on that. There's a report that says that sorry, I need to, okay. In a 2021 document entitled The Economics of Childcare Supply in USA, the Department of Treasury stated that the childcare sector is a crucial and underfunded part of the American economy. I will leave you with other facts. 2.2 million professionals are working daily in those services in USA. In 2017, the salary was around $22,000, and based on this low wage, more than 15% of the childcare workers are below the poverty line established in USA. Finally, on the regard of the financing of the NGO throughout USA, they too are mostly depending on their membership. So I thank you for your time, and mostly I thank you for your interest in ECCE.
Thank you, Maria, and I hope you can share with us all this data, because it is really, really important and amazing for all of us in order to understand what is happening really with financing education, early childhood education and care. Rapidly continuing with our program, I have the pleasure to introduce you our Vice President of the African region, Nyamike Kiama, holds a degree in statistics and mathematics from the University of Ghana and an EMBA in business management in the University of Ghana Business School. She is an insurance professional and is associated with UK Charter Insurance Institute, and she is now a qualified early childhood educator owing to her passion for giving children a solid foundation before they enter to primary school. She is also the owner of Willow Tree Children's Center and Child Development Center in Accra. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mercedes. And hello again to everybody. These are a few reflections on the financial challenges in Africa for ECCE. We note that the Tashkent Declaration and its commitments aim to address various challenges in early childhood education globally, including financial obstacles. Now, some potential financial challenges affecting early childhood education in Africa are as follows. These are general comments that affect all our OMEP countries. So our OMEP countries are Angola, Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Ghana, Kenya, Liberia, Mauritius, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and Tanzania. And we see that many African countries face a lack of adequate financial resources to support early childhood education programs. This insufficient funding can and has resulted in limited access to quality education, inadequate infrastructure, and insufficient learning materials and resources. We also have inadequate distribution of funds. And we see that even when funds are available, there may be an unequal distribution of resources among regions or within the communities. This leads to disparities in access and the quality of access to and the quality of early childhood education. There's also limited public investment. Some countries also struggle with low public investment in early childhood education. Insufficient government funding can impede the expansion and improvement of early childhood education programs. This has resulted in inadequate facilities, a shortage of qualified teachers, and a lack of comprehensive support systems. We also look at dependency on external aid. Most African countries rely heavily on external aid and donor funding for the early childhood education initiatives. This dependence can create challenges as it may be unstable, unpredictable, or insufficient to meet the long-term needs of the sector. And then we look at affordability for families. I remember our speaker talked about most of the early childhood sector being funded by private sector. So the cost of early childhood education can be a significant burden for many families, especially in countries with high poverty rates. Limited availability prevents parents from enrolling their children in quality early childhood education programs or force them to opt for lower quality alternatives. So in conclusion, we would say that addressing these financial challenges requires concerted efforts from governments, policymakers, stakeholders, and the international community. And we see that the Tashkent Declaration is very timely, as it seems to encourage increased investment, policy reforms, and collaboration to improve early childhood globally and especially across Africa, including addressing financial barriers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear Nyamike. Undoubtedly, we have great challenges thinking in the inequalities ahead that we have in the region and ahead in relation to ECCE financing. Well, our last presentation will be made by Adriana Wisnik-Jagnit, Vice President of the European region of OMEP. This is a very important region because we have a lot of committees there. And Adriana is Assistant Professor of the Faculty of Teacher Education of the University of Zagreb. She has worked as kindergarten teacher for 20 years. She is the author of several scientific and professional papers and participant in several scientific conferences. And she is the founder of, sorry, Adriana, Kriesnika, Association of Educators, and the Russian National Committee of the World Organization of Early Childhood Education. Before I give her the floor, I should say that I didn't mention that we have our colleague of Pakistan, Mushad. He is participating today, and also our colleagues from Colombia and from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Thank you so much for being here. Now, Adriana, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mercedes, for introduction. So I'm not really sure whether you see my presentation or not, but okay, great, thank you. So hello from Europe. And as you may see, Europe has 44 countries and 4 overseas territories. So therefore, there are very much various stakeholders in early childhood education. And as OMEP, we do have 27 national committees and 2 just soon to be, because we have 2 committees more that that are enrolled for preparatory committee. So as my all previous speakers said, we are all in some way similar but diverse. And when we are talking about funding, then I would say that we are diverse by funding, by expenditure, by the role of public policies and challenges. And although Europe is somehow, we would say close, because there are many countries very close and we are connected, and it is easy to travel from one part of Europe to another part, still our public policies are very much different, and all of these are influencing the financing of early childhood education. So what is somehow similar? We usually have 3 ways of funding, which is public funding, because most of European countries really rely on that part to finance early childhood education and care services. And it is typically allocated through national or regional budgets. And that leads us to the differences that we have. Depending on the budget of your country or your region, that much money the early childhood education get. On the other hand, we have also, most of the countries has a parental contribution.
Sorry, Adriana, the slides are not changing.
Okay, something happened, but you can, I think that you can. you can see and hear.
You can stop sharing and share again. Yes, there is.
Okay, I can stop sharing. The technique always happen. Okay, I hope that now you see, yes, but you see a whole screen, and it doesn't matter. I will just not spend your time. So when we are talking about parental contribution, that leads us to another differences. If we have a poorest parents that have a lack of enrollment to early childhood education because of the money, because of the possibilities, because of the distance, and so therefore we have a huge differences in that part as well. So we do have some public, some private funding, but it's occasionally because of some specific interest or initiatives or some projects that are we happy in early childhood education in Europe, that we have European Union projects that actually help us with the funding of early childhood education. But nevertheless, it's not same for all countries. It's not same for all children. So there are many things that we should do as in that part. So although we are, as I already said, very close to each other, but we have very difference, very much, we are very much different by the staff that are working in early childhood educational settings. It depends on the name of the settings, on the founder of the settings, on the aims of the settings. So we have non-qualified staff to master educated staff. So therefore, there is also a large difference between us. So that consequently, it is seen in their salaries and trainings, and the funding is quite different for that. Also, we have a huge variety in the approaches to early childhood education, from, for example, Montessori, which is very expensive materials, to the nature as a didactic and a resource. For example, forest kindergartens in one huge part of Europe are present. Therefore, the expenditure to that is quite different. And of course, we do have administrative costs that are different by the region, by the country, and not just by the country, but also within the regions inside the countries, we can find a difference. And what is good, if you live in Europe, then you know that in European Union set a quality early childhood education and care centers and education itself as a priority. Therefore, they demand that we have universal access, that we do have some quality standards, that early childhood education should be affordable to all children in Europe, and they are somehow mentioned that there are long-term economic benefits from the early childhood education. Well, as you may know, the enrollment of children from 3 to starting a compulsory primary education is between 40% and 100% in Europe, which is really a huge variety. And most of the countries are around 80% and above. But on the other hand, those who has like 40% are the poorest country, for example, North Macedonia, or some countries that has low budget rates as Macedonia. So therefore, the status of the country very much influence the policy and the policy to early childhood education. And just a quick mention, what I know that you all know that what is happening in the last 3 years, that for sure has consequences for early childhood education and care. We knew that we all have a pandemic, and it's of course influenced the early childhood education as well. But in Europe, we do have war at the moment, and we do have several very huge earthquakes that also has consequences on financing the education, not just early childhood education, but the education in whole. And of course, all of these, what maybe you don't think about Europe, but we have a huge crisis, economic crisis, and therefore, if all of this influence early childhood education. So more money for some other things and less money for the early childhood education. So this is the challenges that we have in Europe. I think when we compare us as a region with some other regions of the world, we would say that we are lucky, we are maybe wealthier, or we have a easier access to early childhood education. But as in all regions, it's actually depend on where you live and how much money do you make and how much money does a country dedicate to early childhood education. So there is still much more thing to do in order to ensure that really every child on the planet has access and it has affordable early childhood education. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adriana, and thank you for all for the participation. And really, Adriana was stressing that all the regions have fragmentations, inequalities, and diversity across the countries and inside each country. Thank you so much, Adriana, and thank you all for your participation. As you will see, the initiatives of this Global Action Week for Education do not end here, as well as the commitment made in Tashkent and the work that should be done for the transforming education movement. The growth and strengthening of our collective ability to influence is the main condition of our advocacy work. Putting pressure on governments like these, the development of public policies and measures that contribute to realizing the human right of education is probably our overarching goal and of our advocacy work. This action should be supported over deep knowledge and ethics, of course. OMEP Action is honoring its special consultative status with the United Nations system and its official partnership with UNESCO, and pushing the visibility of early childhood education and care inside all UNESCO projects. From OMEP, we value solidarity and participation with important networks and with our key partners to carry out our work and reach out our aims. We are especially grateful with the Global Campaign for Education, GAWE, Right to Education Initiative, Human Rights Watch, ActionAid, among other civil society organizations that work all together in solidarity. In this amazing session, we have once again insisted that education is a right, not a privilege, not a merchandise, not charity, but a right, as Maria stressed very well. Its financing has to come from the mobilization of internal state resources through progressive taxation, putting an end to tax evasion, and insisting in tax justice. Part of the education finances can also be supported for in comparison, but always based on the paradigm of human rights. To end this session, I will communicate some parish notice. Don't forget to follow our social media at OMEP and to visit the OMEP website regularly. And you will have in our YouTube channel, OMEP World TV, we will be uploading the videos of this seminar in all the 3 languages. And the previous, and you can find the previous 9 seminars series that are already uploaded. I would again like to thank Maria Ron Balsera for this amazing presentation, and of course our OMEP regional vice presidents that are so amazing for their nutrition presentation. I also warmly thank to the OMEP Secretariat and the communication team, and also our translators that have made a huge effort today. I am also grateful with all you colleagues from around the world that have been participating in this webinar with commitment, with love, with respect, so I am really, really amazed, and it was a pleasure to spending time with you today. Thank you so much, and see you soon. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you, OMEP.
Gracias. Thank you.
Thank
Merci
you.
beaucoup.
Thank you. Merci.
Merci tout le monde.
Gracias.
Bye. Thank you.
Una alegría verles.
Thank you. Good night.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, mes amis.
Merci, merci.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.